Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yashoda Nandana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivrajagacharya Sata Shishimad. His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasati Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopagopanath Sham Kund Radha Kund Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Vrindavan Dham ki jai, Mayapur Dham ki jai, Navadvip Dham ki jai, Ganga Mai ki jai, Yamuna Mai ki jai, Tulsi Devi ki jai, Bhakti Devi ki jai, Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Gaura Premananda, Hari Hari Bolo. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shishi Guru and Garanga and His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Okay, so we're in the 10th canto in chapter 68 on text 40, correct? Yes. Okay. Adya Nishkauravam Upitrim Karishyamiti Amarshita Grihitva Halam Utastau Dahan Iva Jagat Trayam Ajanishkauravam Pritvavim Karishyamityamarsita Grihitva Halambhutastau Dahaniva Jagatrayam Ajanishkauravam Prithvim Karishyamityamarsita Grihitva Halamutastau Dahaniva Jagatrayam Ajanishkauravam Pritvavim Karishyamityamarsita Grihitva Halamutastau Dahaniva Jagatrayam. Ajanishkauravam Prithvim Karishyamityamarsita Trahalamutastau Dahaniva Jagatrayam Ajanishkauravam Prithvim Karishyamityamarsita Grihitva Halamutastau Dahaniva Jagatrayam Ajanishkauravam Prithvim Karishyamityamarsita Grihitva Halamutastau Dahaniva Jagatrayam Ajanishkauravam Prithvim Karishyamityamarsita Grihitva Halamutastau Dahamiva Jagatrayam. Anybody else? Ajanishkaurabam prithvim Karishyami chamarshita Gitva utashtav Nahaniva jagatayam Adya today Nishkauravam devoid of the Kauravas Prithvim the earth Karishyami I shall make Iti thus speaking Amarshita angry Grihitva taking Halam his plow Utashtau he stood Dahan burning Eva as if Jagat the worlds Trayam three. So translation, today I shall rid the earth of the Kauravas, declared the furious Balaram. Thus he took his plow weapon and rose up as if to set the three worlds ablaze. So we can repeat, today I shall rid the earth of the Kauravas, declared the furious Balaram. Thus he took his plow weapon and rose up as if to set the three worlds ablaze. So I will read the commentaries and do a couple of more verses and then prayerfully make some comments. So Jiva Goswami simply shares that I will rid the earth of the Kauravas today, he said in anger. So text 41. Langalagrena nagaram udvidarya gajavayam vichakarsha sagangayam praharishan amarshita. The Lord angrily dug up Hastinapur with the tip of his plow and began to drag it, intending to cast the entire city into the Ganges. So purport by the followers of His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srila Prabhupada writes as follows. Lord Balaram seemed so furious that he looked as if he could burn the whole cosmic creation to ashes. He stood up steadily and, taking his plow in his hands, began striking the earth with it. In this way, the whole city of Hastinapur was separated from the earth. Lord Balaram then began to drag the city toward the flowing water of the river Ganges. Because of this, there was a great tremor throughout Hastinapur, as if there had been an earthquake, and it seemed that the whole city would be dismantled. And then he continues to share that Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti states that by the Lord's desire, his plow had increased in size, and that as Balaram began dragging Hastinapur toward the water, he ordered the Ganges, except for Samba, you should attack and kill everyone in the city with your water. Thus he would fulfill his promise to rid the earth of the Kauravas, while making sure that nothing would happen to Samba. And then the actual commentary by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, with the tip of his plow, which had increased in size by his desire, pulling up the city by digging at the base of the southern wall, he began dragging it with force towards the water. Why? To throw it in the Ganga. He ordered the Ganga, except for Samba, kill everyone by attacking the whole city except for Samba with water. This was to fulfill his previous promise that he would rid the earth of the Kauravas. Through the whole city, though the whole city would be submerged, Samba would be safe. And then Jiva Goswami shares, he began to pull the city to the Ganga forcibly in order to destroy the city. Or he dragged the city to make it fall into the Ganga. By his will, his plow became very long. And then text 42 and 43. Jalayanam ivagurnam Gangayam nagaram patat Akrishamanam alokya Kauravajata sambrama Tameva sharanam jagmu sukutumba jijivishava salakshmanam puraskritya sambam pranjalaya prabhum. Seeing that their city was tumbling about like a raft at sea as it was being dragged away, and that it was about to fall into the Ganges, the Kauravas became terrified. To save their lives, they approached the Lord for shelter, taking their family with them. Placing Samba and Lakshmana in front, they joined their palms in supplication. So purport. The city of Hastinapur began to roll about like a raft in a stormy sea. The frightened Kauravas, to quickly appease the Lord, immediately brought Samba and Lakshmana and placed them in front. So the commentary from Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, seeing their city moving about like a boat and about to fall into the Ganga, the Kauravas became fearful. There is an extra syllable in the first line of verse 43, as there may be 9 instead of 8 syllables in the line according to the Bhashavriti. They put Lakshmana and Samba in front in order to please Balaram quickly. And then Jiva Goswami says, first they saw the city wobbling and then falling into the Ganga. Then they saw Balaram pulling it. Then they tried to save their lives. They lost all pride. They approached Balaram, taking shelter of him as the Lord Prabhum. Or they approached him since he was capable, Prabhum, of forgiving their offense. Or Prabhum can modify Sambam. Putting Samba in front as capable of stopping this disaster, they approached Balaram. If the city fell in the water, Samba and Lakshmana would be in danger. Thus, to please Balaram, they put Samba in front as an offering first. But Lord Balaram was not worried about Samba falling into the water. He pulled the city only to scare them. So, Om Jnana Timirandasya Gananjana Slakya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So the last verse and this sentence that the last of the purport that said the frightened Kauravas, to quickly appease the Lord, immediately brought Samba and Lakshmana and placed them in front. And I was thinking, how cowardly. You know, and you see it, you know, sometimes in movies, you know, and probably in real life circumstance, because a lot of that's based on, you know, real life circumstance. You know, there's somebody who's really tough and, you know, thinking they're all in control of everything, and then, you know, at the last minute when they've lost all hope, you know, they'll put a child in front of them thinking that this is going to save them. And I was just, you know, to me, this shows who they really are, right? You know, and certainly it's to appease, you know, Balaram, and they know that that's probably what would do, but I just thought, how cowardly is it to put innocence, you know, or the innocents in front, you know, and make them pay for their indiscretion. And then I was thinking, not only are they cowards, but they actually lack sincerity. And they're very selfish, self-motivated, lack compassion, have no empathy, you know, and, you know, this indicativeness of the lack of sincerity, you know, of lesson learned. Like, they're not learning their lesson. They're simply putting these children in front, you know, to appease Balaram and his anger. But it's not like they've learned anything. And you know that, to me, these are like crocodile tears. You know, it's just like a false pretense to get them out of trouble. Like, you know, I know if you have children, sometimes children will do anything to get out of trouble, right? And, you know, not take that responsibility. But I also saw it as foreshadowing, because if you think about what's to come in the Mahabharata, you know, they did so many heinous things, and so indicative of the fact that they're not learning their lesson. And so I started to really meditate on this sincerity, or lack thereof sincerity in this particular situation. And I was thinking about how sincerity is so much a part of devotional service.
in as much as it's what leads to devotional service. Because if you think about it, once the heart has this shift and this sincerity, it opens the door to the association of the devotees. It opens the door to finding a spiritual master, because once the heart has that small change of sincerity of wanting to have some relationship with God, with Krishna, then Krishna makes, all the arrangements so that we come into the sadhu sangha, that we come into this association of devotees, so that that little teeny bit of sincerity will open the door to us and our relationship with him and obtaining his love, and then, growing spiritually and slowly shedding all this misdirection of consciousness, which is obviously what the gurus have. And so I was thinking, like within sincerity, there are so many elements, especially as it relates to devotional service. And I was thinking there's all these, that if you think about sincerity, there's a lot that's actually packed into it. So unpacking it, that there's an indication with sincerity that there's humility. And if there's some humility, it opens that door, right? That we're able to actually hear, that we're willing to hear. That's part of that. There's this willingness to be vulnerable in sincerity, because if you're, wanting to connect to God and he's arranging that you have the association and obtaining a spiritual master to give you guidance, in order for that to have any impact, you have to be willing to hear. There's a direct connection between the ear and the heart. And then of course, as it was mentioned, they lost all pride temporarily. It's not that it was long term, obviously. But that's another part of sincerity, is that, you're sincerely willing to give up this idea of controlling and, pride, because, and again, where this humility and vulnerability come in, and being willing to hear, is this loss of pride too, because in order to be able to take that instruction and actually act on it, you have to hear the feedback. You have to hear the feedback, and you have to hear, the instructions. You have to hear the chastisement, and being willing to take it. And that requires a lot of vulnerability. I was actually recently watching a video, and it was relative to leadership. And one of the things that the persons was sharing was that real leadership, which obviously the Kauravas are not really giving, or exemplifying, but real leadership does entail vulnerability and showing up and personal connection and valuing others' voices, valuing others' contributions. And I personally can see that, for example, in my spiritual master and my own situation, because I come into this with a bunch of false ego. I come in, with so much conditioning, and yet he has always given me a place for my voice to exist, for my voice to have some value. He's never belittled me. He chastises, yes, and he gives instructions and feedback, but he's never, ever made me feel like my voice didn't count, or that there was no value to my voice. And that's real leadership. And so, and what this person was saying relative to vulnerability and showing up and having empathy, is it was the little micro levels of support in valuing their employees, of checking in and connecting with them personally to see how they were doing and to have empathy for their situation, so that when you get into a place where you got to go onto the battlefield, be it in business or on the actual battlefield, when you go to ask them to show up, they'll do it because you've been there for them personally. So of course they're going to do it for you. And so that's what real leadership is, but it does require vulnerability. That, I'm not perfect, that I'm actually willing to hear your voice and, take that into account and understand that has a potential impact to create, a greater workforce, a greater support system, because you have some level of insight and your voice matters. And that's, again, this showing up in personalism, which for me, that's what Krishna consciousness is all about. It's about personalism, about the greatest personal connection that we can have, which is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Personalism versus being in the head. And one of my favorite sharings or, insights or realizations, or one of the things that Prabhupada shared in one of his purports in the Bhagavad Gita is that if you have religion without philosophy, without the scientific knowledge, without the backing up of knowledge base, then you've got sentimentality or sentimentalism that leads into fundamentalism. Just like, so it doesn't have anything to meter it, to bring it back into balance. Same thing on the other side. If you have philosophy without religion, without the heart, without the compassion, without the empathy, without the personalism, then you just have dry mental speculation. You have something that's, that's dry, and it's not going to have any impact on the folks that you need it to. And so because it just, and I think about it, because in other words, if you go about, clarifying or, just spouting book knowledge, gyan without vigyan, without the realization and acting on it, then it's just impersonalism. And so personalism means being there for others. And then not just being there for others, but actually how you're there for them, right? So being there, sharing, philosophy, but then not really seeing somebody, not really understanding what their position is or what they're going through, and just, giving them the philosophy without the heart, is really, again, not going to have an impact. And so there has to be some heart, this philosophy. I was thinking about it, that there's no compassion in the application of knowledge if there's no heart in it, right? And no connect. That's what empathic, my spiritual master is very, emphasizes very much empathic communication. And really, if you think about it, the essence of compassion is being there, is showing up. And so, and going back to the Kauravas and thinking about this circumstance, I was also tying it into this whole situation with Draupadi in the court of being disrobed, and how that was, you've got Bhishma, who knows better, who knows, the philosophy, and yet he's tied to all his traditions, and because of that, he remains voiceless for somebody else who's voiceless. He remains silent, and he becomes culpable for that. And certainly these are pastimes. He's a great personality. He's a great Mahatma, but, again, if you're sitting there just, spouting the rules and the regulations and the traditions and, all those set boundaries without having compassion and understanding that time, it's a matter of time, place, and circumstance, it's going to have it can have detrimental effects. And so I was thinking, it's like, for us as devotees, it's so important to be a voice for the voiceless. It's so important for us to not remain silent when they're suffering. It's so important for us to set the example for society of what compassion looks like, versus what's end up going to happen. Because if you think about it, in Draupadi's position, how insane it was that because of, according to, Dharma, and Yudhisthira, being the highest example of quote unquote Dharma, and Bhishma and all these other great personalities, and yet they let some innocent stand in front and take the fall. Just like the Kauravas here, pushing them forward. Here, you go. You make them, not be angry anymore. And it's so important to not forget why we're doing what we're doing, and not to necessarily remain silent when there's others that need to be cared. Because I keep hearing this, and I think about it, in context of how insane the world is. It always is. It's a material world. But, I hear Krishna asking me, you want my love, you, for yourself. And I do. I want Krishna's love. I need it in order to be balanced, in order to have his vision. But then he's also asking me, he keeps asking me, but do you love my other children as well? Do you love all the other living entities? Do you care for them? And do you care for their suffering? Can you see them? Can you hear them? And what are you going to do about it? Or are you going to stay in your safe box and leave it at that, right? At what point am I going to be willing to surrender my silence to speak for the voiceless? And I think, at least for me personally, that's, it's so significant. And I remember several things. Hridayananda Das Goswami saying, in order to advance spiritually, you have to challenge yourself to continually come out of your comfort zone. And you saw that with the first the first devotees and going out on Sankirtan. And my spiritual master talks about that when he first went out. Like, I think it was the first or second day that my spiritual master, Bir Krishna Goswami, went out on Sankirtan. And he was so afraid that when he saw somebody he knew, he would kind of duck in to a door place and not go out there. But obviously he overcame that. And, so many of the devotees did that. So, how do we go outside of our comfort zone to care? And then I also thought about this whole thing of vulnerability and putting ourselves out there, and humility, because Bhakti Tirtha Swami shared, and I didn't hear the lecture specifically, but from somebody who had heard one of the lectures about humility, is one of the cores of humility is courage. And I think I spoke about this last time I shared in class, is that we're going against the stream. We're going against the whole way of everybody focused materially in society, right? We're going in the opposite direction. So it takes a lot of courage to go in the opposite direction, to do the right thing. And Bhakti Tirtha Swami was saying just that, because ultimately we have to do what Krishna wants us to do. And that takes a tremendous amount of vulnerability to step out there in front and say, y'all are going in the wrong direction. And they're like, no, I want to be comfortable in my material situation. But we have to keep putting ourselves out there to say, no, you're going in the wrong direction. As uncomfortable as that may be, to challenge ourselves, to do that. And that's what he was talking about, is that it takes a lot of courage to do what Krishna wants us to do, right? And I was also thinking in this whole situation, and also Arjuna on the battlefield, having to do what Krishna wanted him to do, and including dressing up, right, like a woman. And in one particular instance, and Brihanala, and may be embarrassing, but what was its purpose? Why are we doing what we're doing? It was to, save a situation of somebody who was vulnerable, and so that requires courage. And I kept going back to that in Bhakti Tirtha, saying it's not that courage is that you're weak and submissive and passive. Humility requires courage to do what it is that Krishna is going to ask us to do. So, for me, going back and, unpacking all of this and thinking about this lack of sincerity that the Kauravas had, and wanting to use it as an opportunity to remind myself to have courage, and to not be ashamed to practice Krishna consciousness, or not be ashamed to share something that's going to be of value, even though it may seem apparently humiliating. There's just an opportunity to be a real leader. And that doesn't, again, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to go out on the front lines, because again, I was listening to a lecture by Srila Prabhupada, which I think I shared last time too, is that there's some of us who are, the support system behind the front lines. A lot of, at least, I think about myself, because I'm, doing a lot of stuff in the background, a lot of stuff in the background, with all the finance and, trying to manage some of the property management and making sure that things are kept in, the mode of goodness and in good repair and all those things. And so, and a lot of administrative work. But then that supports and gives the opportunity for the people that are on the front lines to be able to do that, right? And so, and as Prabhupada was sharing, so you may not be on the front lines directly, but, and as householders, he was talking about too, like, you have to work, you have to take care of your family, there's so many things that you have to do, to keep all of that stable. And so he was saying, but then you preach or outreach or do outreach to your family, to your friends, in whatever little opportunity, in whatever little way that we have. We can go big or small, but we do it. And we do it because we don't want them to end up, suffering. Because ultimately that's what it is with the Kauravas. I mean, they're going to be suffering. Like, if you think about Duryodhana's death was just horrible. He's laying there with his thighs cracked, which, just the pain was just so incredibly immense. But then I was also thinking that as we go back into, some of these shared verses, that it was according to the Lord's will, that all of these things happened circumstantially, so that this lack of sincerity or this abominable mentality can be changed, because that's, also part of the take. It's not like just like a physical get rid of them because of their physical activities, but to get rid of this misled or lack of Krishna consciousness. And sometimes Krishna will put us through immensely painful and immensely challenging things, but only for the benefit of bringing us closer to him, of having that relationship. So, that to me in all of this, as I was thinking about it, was, the challenge horse thrown down is, how to develop my sincerity more, how to become more humble, how to become, challenging myself to be willing to hear more, to open my ears and not, fall into, complacence or old habits, because I've been trained by the material world, for 40 some odd years before coming here, and, before having the opportunity to practice Krishna consciousness. So I need to be willing to keep that avenue open, and recognize my pride and then take responsibility for it, because I think that's the other thing that ties into all of that sincerity and humility and willingness to hear, is to be willing to hear, but then be introspective enough to act on that, so that ultimately we can have this relationship with Krishna, but not just obtain his love for myself, but obtain his love so that I can share it with others, so that they can have that love, not to be selfish about it, and that's can be hugely challenging, because my personal experience of growing up in the South, which is the Bible Belt, and, I don't want to be a Bible thumper or just shoving philosophy down people's throats for the sake of, it's the right thing, this is, perfect philosophy, but rather to look for those little teeny opportunities or little teeny avenues where there's a little break in their willingness to be open so that you can share, and a lot of that comes when, and I experience this with my family a lot, especially with my mother and my sister, they're like my mother being 88 and, coming into some level of fear as she's approaching death, really, ultimately. It's not like she's talking about it up front, but ultimately that's there so that whenever she's in a circumstance, she feels very vulnerable and afraid, even though she's not saying it. But then that's an opportunity for me to share Krishna consciousness in this little avenue. Same thing with my sister and other different circumstances. So, again, of not just taking this Krishna consciousness, for ourselves and, taking the lessons and not putting the innocence out front, but taking the responsibility for ourselves, right? Not blaming others in a situation or fault finding and all these things, but taking the responsibility, if you've done something that maybe you shouldn't have, right? But taking the full responsibility, but that takes a lot of courage to be vulnerable on that level. But it's worth it because then we develop this empathy and, realize that our others are in the same position, and this empathy and compassion, which is so, there's no separating it from Krishna consciousness. If you can't be compassionate or empathic, then you really can't be, you can't be Krishna conscious. There's just no way. And you saw that with Prabhupada. I was thinking about when he was in Vrindavan, and he heard that there were children fighting with dogs for scraps of food. And it was overwhelming for him. And he was in tears because of the suffering. And he said, within 20 miles, you have to feed them. This is just, and so, and it's not just 20 miles. It's the whole world that we're responsible for. Because once you gain knowledge, you have to act on that knowledge, or it has absolutely no value, right? Then you're a hypocrite, actually, if you don't act on that knowledge. And it's the same thing with the Vedanta hospitals. It's not just that they're mundane hospitals, but there is spiritual sound in the halls of those hospitals that are helping not only devotees, but anybody that may not be a devotee, so that they can have some small spiritual, at the end of life, potentially, help, right? And so, to me, that's what, it's about. It's about expanding the family. And if we're expanding the family, then you care for them as if they're family. You put value in their voice and give them a place for the voice. Because it talks about in the Bhagavad Gita that, it's misplaced compassion is having compassion for the dress of a drowning man, right? Because you're not just focused on the body and saving the body. It's important to save the soul. At the same time, this field is required to advance in this material world towards a relationship with Krishna. So the basic needs have to be met. Food, lodge, clothing, all these things, empathy, compassion for somebody. Because when you don't value somebody's voice, then you basically say they don't exist and they don't value. Do you know how painful that is? It's so immensely painful to feel like you don't exist. And I share that from personal experience. But so again, it's the challenge horse to not be insincere, not to put the innocence out front, take responsibility, develop your relationship because you want love, you want Krishna's love, but then remember his other living entities, right? So I don't know if there's any, I think it's about time, but if there's any thoughts or questions. Yes, Apurva. Yes, because vulnerability, as I see it, relative to practicing Krishna consciousness, it's not that you need to share your most intimate vulnerabilities or, just be an open book on everything, but vulnerability in the context of putting yourself out there, the vulnerability of willing to being able to hear, the willingness to share your mistakes, the willingness to, show some of your weaknesses. I mean, you don't have to tell, all the intimate details of your life, because some people will actually use that against you. And I've experienced that too with vulnerability. But if you have a relationship with Krishna, which is the difference between having vulnerability outside of Krishna consciousness and in it, then you have the support system that you need with Guru, Shastra, and Sadhu, with your Guru and association of those, because it is the six loving exchanges, right? The three, now I'm forgetting, 6 loving exchanges is important. So vulnerability, like everything, is simultaneously one and different, or this balancing on this razor's edge. It's not that you just have to be open all out of everything, but vulnerability allows for, the willingness to hear and to advance, is how I see it, and to show personalism, actually, I guess, is where, for me, is what I was kind of trying to focus on. So, all glories to Srimad Bhagavatam, all glories to Srila Prabhupada, all glories to the devotees and their association, all glories to Shri Shri Radha Golokananda Ki Jai.
Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami Kanvandam Maravindadalaya Taksham Bharavatam Samasitam Buddhasundarangam Kandar Agom Vidamaniya Vishesha Shobha Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami Angani Yasa Sakale Priti Manti Lasyan Dipan Dikayanti Jiram Naganti Ananda Chinmaya Sadhu Jala Vigrahasya Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindam Adipurusham
Krishna Prestaya Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Vaskachade Satarine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Vaskachade Satarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Ram Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Ram Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Ram Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Ram Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Ram Hare 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 Krishna Hare 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 Rama Ram Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Golokananda, Radha Golokananda, Radha Golokananda, Shri Radhe. Radha Golokananda, Radha Golokananda, Radha Golokananda, Shri Radhe. Jaya Radha Golokananda, Radha Golokananda, Radha Golokananda, Shri Radhe. Radha Golokananda, Radha Golokananda, Radha Golokananda, Shri Radhe. Jaya Giri Govardhan Jaya, 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 Prabhupada Jaya, Prabhupada Jaya, Prabhupada Srila Prabhupada Jaya, Prabhupada Jaya, Prabhupada Jaya, Prabhupada Srila Prabhupada. Gurudev, Gurudev, Gurudev Jaya Jaya, Gurudev Jaya Jaya, Gurudev, Gurudev, Gurudev Jaya Jaya, Gurudev.
Founder Srila Prabhupada ki Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gol Gopinath Shamako and Radha Kund Giri Govardhan ki Vrindavan Dham ki Mayapur Dham ki Navadvip Dham ki Purnamai ki Purnamai ki Vasudeva ki Bhakti Devi ki Shri Shri Radha Golokananda ki Samaveda Bhakti Vrinda ki Lord of Premanandi. All glories to the assembled. All glories to the assembled. All glories to the assembled. All glories to Shri Guru and
Cheto Darpana Marjana Bhava Mahadavagni Nirvapanam Sreya Kairava Chandrika Vitarinam Vidya Vadu Jivanam Anandam Buddhi Vardhanam Pratipadam Purnam Risram Vadanam Sarvatma Snapanam Param Vijayate Shri Krishna Sankirtanam Nam Namagari Bahuda Nija Sarva Shaktis Tatra Niyami Amitas Marane Nakala Eta Trisita Vakripa Tarurapi Shahishnuna Amanina Mananina Kirtaniya Sadahari Nadanam Najanam Nasundarim Pavitam Va Jagadishakamaye Mama Janmani Janmanishvare Bhavatat Bhattirarhitiki Vaye Ainandam Tanuja Kinkaram Papitamam Vishame Bhavam Buddha Kripaya Vankaja Stitas Dule Sadrishan Vinchintaya Nayana Vaya Vargo Hridai Gira
Sakar Nichitam Babukadam Tava Jamanahave Pravishati Yugayitam Nimeshena Chakshusha Pravishayitam Sunyayitam Jagat Sarvam Govinda Vidahena Me Asti Shava Paramadastu Mam Adarshamar Karutova Yatatata Lampato Mat Prana Natastu Saeva Napara. Victory to the Sri Krishna Sankirtan, which cleanses the heart of all the dust accumulated for years, and it extinguishes the fire of conditional life, of repeated birth and death. The Sankirtan movement is the prime benediction for humanity at large, because it spreads the rays of the benediction moon. It is the life of all transcendental knowledge. It increases the ocean of transcendental bliss, and it enables us to fully taste the nectar for which we are always anxious. O my Lord, congregational chanting of your holy name. Vinda. In these transcendental, all your transcendental energies, there are not even hard and fast rules for chanting these names. O my Lord, out of your kindness, you enable us to easily approach you by your holy names, but I am so unfortunate that I have no attraction for them. One should chant the holy name of the Lord in a humble state of mind, thinking oneself lower than the straw in the street. One should be more tolerant than a tree, devoid of all sense of false prestige, and should be ready to offer all respects to others. In such a state of mind, I can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. O Almighty Lord, I have no desire to accumulate wealth, nor do I desire beautiful women, nor do I want any number of followers. I only want your causeless devotional service, birth after birth. O son of Maharaj Nanda Krishna, I am your eternal servitor, yet somehow or other I have fallen into the ocean of birth and death. Please pick me up from this ocean of death and place me as one of the atoms at your lotus feet. O my Lord, when will my eyes be decorated with tears of love flowing constantly when I chant your holy name? When will my voice choke up, and when will the hairs of my body stand on end at the recitation of your name? O Govinda, feeling your separation, I am considering a moment to be like 12 years or more. Tears are flowing from my eyes like torrents of rain, and I am feeling all vacant in the world in your absence. I know no one but Krishna as my Lord, and he shall remain so even if he handles me roughly by his embrace, or makes me broken-hearted by not being present before me. He is completely free to do anything and everything, for he is always my worshipful Lord, unconditionally. Shri Shikshastakam ki jai, Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ki jai. Just one humble request for prayers again.